What if the world's most famous entertainer, the king of rock and roll, was forced to confront his very identity, not on his own terms but in front of thousands of people? Imagine the chaos and vulnerability of stepping into a hostile crowd that doesn't want you, one that expects nothing more than the same manufactured persona they've come to know. This moment in history isn't a fairy tale, it's real, raw, and transformative. And for Elvis Presley, it was the beginning of a profound shift, a transformation that would challenge everything he thought about fame, art, and his own worth. In the summer of 1969, Elvis Presley was poised for a comeback, a return to live performance after years of dominating the silver screen. His performance at the Newport Folk Festival was meant to mark his artistic evolution, but instead it almost became his undoing. This wasn't the glittering lights of Las Vegas or the adoring crowds of his loyal fans. It was a folk music festival, a place filled with purists who saw Elvis as a sellout, a commercialized icon who had long abandoned his musical roots. As he stood backstage in a simple black shirt and jeans, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. The murmurs of a skeptical crowd reached his ears, some ready to cheer, but many more ready to boo. This wasn't just about the music. This was a moment of reckoning, a clash of ideals, art, and the pressure of a man who had been put on a pedestal and now faced the danger of falling from it. What was at stake here wasn't just Elvis's reputation, but his very self, his authenticity, his voice, and his future in music. The question was clear. Could he reclaim the authenticity that had made him the king, or had he already sold out to fame and fortune? And how would the world, and more importantly, Elvis himself, view the performance that was about to unfold? Elvis Presley had always been a paradox. To the public, he was an enigma, an irresistible combination of charm, fame, and unmatched talent. His voice was his gift, his performances electrifying, and his persona larger than life. But beneath that well-crafted image was a man struggling with the weight of it all. As the years passed, the pressures mounted, and the man who had once been the embodiment of authenticity found himself adrift in a sea of expectations. The early days of Elvis's career were defined by a raw energy that felt as real as the music itself. He had emerged from the poverty-stricken streets of Tupelo, Mississippi, a poor boy with nothing but a love for music. It was music that made him feel alive, that connected him to something greater than himself. His humble beginnings, his love for gospel, blues, and country were the heart of his sound. But as he became a superstar, fame started to overshadow the essence of his craft. The glitz and glamour of Hollywood began to consume him, and slowly the man who once embodied authenticity started to feel like a shell of his former self. Now, as he prepared to step onto the Newport Folk Festival stage, the anxiety that gripped him wasn't just about the performance. It was about something far deeper. Would the audience see through him? Would they hear the art in his voice, or just the echoes of the image they had been sold for years? The man who had once blazed his own trail, who had reshaped the sound of music itself, was now standing at a crossroads to stick to the safe, predictable route, or to risk everything for something more real, more vulnerable. Backstage, Elvis could feel the weight of his insecurities. The music industry had moved on. The folk scene was now where the heart of true, authentic music lived. Here at this festival, people valued substance over style. They rejected the polished perfection of Hollywood and embraced the raw, unrefined truth of music that came from a place of pain, struggle, and truth. They saw him as a fraud, a symbol of everything they stood against, everything they believed music should not be. As Elvis adjusted his shirt and jeans, trying to show respect for the festival's anti-commercial ethos, he couldn't help but wonder if he had lost something precious along the way. Fame had provided him with everything he thought he wanted: wealth, admiration, a place in history. But at what cost? Had he traded his authenticity for success? The man who had once crooned, "That's all right," with an energy that seemed to come straight from the soul, was now unsure if he still had that spark. As he stood at the wings of the stage, the crowd's restlessness seeped through the walls. This wasn't just another show. It was a battle for his identity, his legacy, and his purpose as an artist. As Elvis stepped onto the stage, the contrast was immediate and jarring. The roar of the crowd, typically a wave of admiration, now felt more like a battleground. Half of the audience applauded cautiously, curious to see how the king of rock and roll would fare in this unexpected setting. The other half, however, met him with open hostility, jeers, catcalls, and the unmistakable sound of disapproval echoed throughout the venue. "Go back to Hollywood," one shouted. "This isn't Vegas," another yelled. It was a scene that Elvis had never encountered before, not even in the early days when he was the rebellious, troublemaking icon. This was different. This was real, personal, and for the first time in his career, it seemed as if his very existence as an artist was being questioned. The tension in the air was palpable. Elvis, ever the professional, tried to mask his unease with his usual charm. He smiled, offering a wry admission to the crowd. "I know some of you all might be wondering what I'm doing here, and to tell you the truth, I'm wondering the same thing myself." The line brought some laughter, but it wasn't the easy, affectionate laughter he was used to. It was more of an awkward chuckle, laughter born from discomfort, not the joy of entertainment. Then, as if to prove he wasn't completely lost in the moment, Elvis did what he knew best. He picked up his guitar and began to sing. The first notes of "That's All Right" filled the air, a song he had first recorded years earlier, its origins steeped in blues and folk. The audience should have responded to the authenticity of the choice, but instead the boos grew louder, drowning out his voice. He tried to calm the crowd with a song that had always been a safe bet, "Love Me Tender," a gentle ballad that had won the hearts of millions. But this time, it backfired. The softer, more vulnerable song only seemed to confirm the accusations against him. It was the perfect soundtrack to a man who had lost his connection with his roots, a symbol of a pop star turned heartthrob with no true artistic substance. "This is a joke," someone yelled from the crowd. "You've sold out everything real about American music." The words stung deeper than anything Elvis had ever heard. The boos grew louder, like a wave crashing down on him. Each shout, each criticism was a reminder of how far he had strayed from the very music that had made him who he was. For a moment Elvis froze. His hands, which had once been steady as he strummed his guitar, now trembled. The weight of the hostility crashing down on him was unlike anything he had ever faced. This wasn't the screaming fans he was used to, the adoring crowd that sang along to his hits. This was a deep rejection of everything he had become. In that moment, Elvis realized something he had been avoiding for years. The person he had become, the superstar, the product, the Hollywood icon, was not the person he had wanted to be. He had sold out his authenticity, his truth, for fame, wealth, and an image that he thought the world wanted. But in this space, with these people, none of that mattered. The crowd wasn't asking for an entertainer. They were asking for the real Elvis. The realization hit him hard. He wasn't just failing as an artist. He was failing himself. The audience wasn't rejecting him as a person. They were rejecting the mask he had worn for years. And now, standing on that stage, he had no choice but to confront it. Elvis stood motionless at the microphone for what seemed like an eternity. The boos continued to rain down on him, and for a brief moment he considered walking off the stage and retreating into the comfort of his familiar persona. But something inside him shifted. He knew that if he left now, it would be the end of something much more significant than just this performance. It would be the end of any hope for his artistic soul. He had to face it. No matter how uncomfortable, no matter how much he feared rejection, the greatest lesson he would learn would not come from escaping, but from confronting the truth he had been avoiding for years. With a quiet breath, Elvis spoke to the audience, his voice steady but carrying the weight of a lifetime of unspoken thoughts. "You know what? You're right," he began, his words cutting through the tension. "I think I need to go figure out what I'm really trying to say here." The clarity in his voice was both surprising and raw. There was no anger, no defiance, just an acceptance of his vulnerability. The audience, still unsure of how to react, fell into an uneasy silence. In that moment, Elvis made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't going to flee. He was going to return and do something that was not for the critics, not for the fans, but for himself. "I've been playing it safe," Elvis continued, his tone shifting to one of quiet self-realization. "I've been trying to be what everyone expected me to be, instead of being who I actually am." It was a turning point, a profound moment of clarity, where Elvis no longer felt like he was performing for the approval of others. He was now ready to perform for himself, to be honest, raw, and real. And that, in the end, would be the true test of his artistry. He walked off the stage, leaving the angry crowd and the hushed whispers of the backstage crew behind. For a full 15 minutes, he was alone. No entourage, no manager, no distractions. In that small dressing room trailer, Elvis faced himself. There, in the quiet solitude, he found the voice he had lost. The voice that was unafraid to speak the truth, to face the struggles that had shaped him, and to share that truth with the world. When he emerged from the trailer, Elvis was a different man. His previously polished composure had been replaced by something more authentic, something raw. His shirt was looser, his hair slightly disheveled, and his eyes burned with a new intensity. He wasn't just Elvis Presley anymore. He was something deeper, more human, and more honest. "I want to go back out there," he announced to his band, surprising everyone in the room. There was no script, no pre-rehearsed song. He had nothing prepared. But what he did have was the courage to face the truth. The crowd's reaction as he re-entered the stage was immediate and loud. Many were still skeptical, still angry. But Elvis didn't care. This time there was no guitar, no backup musicians, and no carefully curated performance. Just Elvis, standing alone in front of an audience that had already rejected him, ready to share what he had never dared to share before. He cleared his throat and began. "Folks," he said, his voice quieter than before but deeper, carrying a vulnerability that was palpable. "You asked me what my message was, and I didn't have a good answer, but you got me thinking." There was a pause, a brief hesitation before he continued. "Maybe the problem isn't that I don't have a message. Maybe the problem is that I've been afraid to share it." Elvis was no longer the untouchable icon of Hollywood. He was a man baring his soul. As he sang, his voice took on a new power, raw, unpolished, but filled with emotion. The song was unlike anything he had ever performed before. It was called Truth and Consequence, a song he had written in those 15 minutes of solitude. It spoke about his struggles growing up poor in the South, about the racial injustices he had witnessed, about the Vietnam War, and the responsibility he felt for his fame. His words were no longer about selling records. They were about speaking the truth. As Elvis poured his heart into the lyrics, the crowd fell into stunned silence. This wasn't the polished performer they had expected. This wasn't the man who had sung heartthrobs to the masses. This was a man confronting his own limitations, embracing vulnerability, and letting his music become a force for change. By the time the song ended, the Newport Folk Festival had witnessed something extraordinary, a performer rediscovering his authenticity in front of an audience that had rejected him, and a transformation that left everyone in the room changed. Slowly, the first applause came, tentative at first, and then it grew into something much larger. The crowd, once hostile, was now standing, clapping, and acknowledging the man who had dared to be vulnerable. In the hours that followed Elvis's groundbreaking performance, the air was thick with change. The atmosphere at the Newport Folk Festival had transformed from one of hostility to one of reverence. It wasn't just the crowd that had been moved. The entire landscape of music, culture, and artistic expression had shifted. Elvis Presley, once the embodiment of commercialism and Hollywood glamour, had redefined what it meant to be an artist. His moment of vulnerability, the courage to stand before an audience that had rejected him, had sparked something far more profound than just a performance. It was a personal awakening that would change his life and legacy forever. Backstage, the world that had once seemed so carefully controlled by Elvis's manager Colonel Parker suddenly felt irrelevant. The phone calls to arrange an exit had stopped. There was no need to leave, no need to flee from what had just transpired. For the first time in years, Elvis had nothing to prove. He wasn't the king of rock and roll. He was a man who had rediscovered his voice, and that voice wasn't for the masses or for the critics. It was for himself. He had found the courage to be raw, to speak truth, and in doing so he had come back to the roots of what had made him great in the first place, the honesty of his music. In the days that followed, Elvis's performance at Newport was discussed in hushed tones across the music industry. What had begun as a disaster, a humiliating failure, became the talk of the town, not for its failure, but for its redemptive quality. The song Truth and Consequence was recorded shortly after the festival and became one of his most critically acclaimed works. The raw political consciousness, the emotional depth, and the unapologetic honesty in the lyrics resonated with audiences in a way that no amount of commercial success could ever replicate. For Elvis, this was more than just a successful comeback. It was a rebirth. He had returned to the music that had originally inspired him, the music that had come from pain, struggle, and a deep connection to the human experience. This wasn't just about being a star. It was about using his platform to speak truths that had always been buried beneath the glitz of fame. In the years that followed, Elvis's career took a different turn. He continued to perform, but the essence of his music had shifted. He wasn't just singing for entertainment anymore. He was singing to heal, to connect, and to speak out on the issues that mattered. The impact of that one performance rippled far beyond the folk festival. His fans, his peers, and even the critics who had once booed him now recognized the power of his transformation. Elvis had learned a valuable lesson that night, a lesson that would define the rest of his life. Authenticity was not something you had to abandon to succeed. If anything, it was the key to finding meaning in everything you did. The legacy of his performance at the Newport Folk Festival lived on long after the crowd had dispersed. George Wine, the festival organizer, later called it the most remarkable comeback I've ever witnessed. The festival itself even began an annual Truth and Consequence segment, encouraging artists to take creative risks and share more personal, political material. Elvis had shown them that artistic success didn't need to come at the expense of authenticity. It could emerge from the courage to be vulnerable, to fail, and to learn from those failures. And for Elvis, the greatest gift he received that night was not the applause or the recognition. It was the understanding that his true purpose as an artist was to connect, to use his voice not just for fame, but for change. He had walked off that stage defeated, but he had returned to it a man who had rediscovered his own voice, his own purpose, and his own truth. The story of Elvis Presley's unexpected transformation at the Newport Folk Festival is more than just a tale of one man's redemption. It's a universal story about the power of vulnerability, authenticity, and the courage to face our own truths. In that pivotal moment when Elvis stood alone on stage, stripped of his commercial persona, he found something more valuable than fame. He found his voice. He had dared to do what few artists ever do. He allowed himself to be imperfect, to fail, and in the process he learned to speak from the heart. Elvis's decision to return to the stage and share his most honest self wasn't just about reclaiming his career. It was about embracing the very core of what had made him an icon in the first place. The raw, unfiltered connection between an artist and their audience. His performance wasn't perfect. His voice wasn't pristine. But it was real, and that's what made it unforgettable. It was a moment that reminded us all that true greatness comes not from perfection but from authenticity and the willingness to be vulnerable, even when the world is watching. Elvis's journey serves as a powerful reminder that we all have the ability to reinvent ourselves, to rediscover our true purpose, and to find our voice when we've lost our way. We don't need to wait for the perfect moment or the right circumstances to make a change. Sometimes we must be willing to fall, to face rejection, and to confront the uncomfortable truths that reside within us. And it is through this process of self-discovery and courage that we can ultimately find the strength to rise, not as the person others want us to be, but as the person we were always meant to become. As you reflect on Elvis's journey, ask yourself, what truths have I been afraid to face? How has vulnerability shaped the way I connect with others? Like Elvis, we all have the power to transform failure into success, not through the approval of others, but by staying true to ourselves. So take a moment to think about how you can embrace your own authenticity and share your truth with the world. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. How has music, art, or self-expression helped you find your voice? Share your thoughts with us. And don't forget to subscribe to Flame Stories for more powerful and inspiring stories like this one.